Hi, everyone, and welcome to week two. For our first video lecture this week, I wanted to discuss a bit about what pop culture is, why, and then talk about why we're talking about it in a writing classroom. So let's start with what is pop culture. The best definition I've found are the pieces of art, expression, or creation that sum up a society's zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is a term we're going to use a lot this semester, so you're probably going to want to remember what it means. The exact translation is from German and it's time ghost or time spirit, but what it means in this context is the spirit or mood of a time, and we can learn what that is from studying a society's pop culture. Pop culture is considered anything that is mass produced and mass consumed forms of entertainment. Um, the things we do for fun. And we'll look at some specific examples here in a moment. But if you think about wanting to know who someone is, who a culture is, what they care about, sometimes the best way to do that is to figure out what are they really into. Many cultural aspects of society disappear or change rapidly. Clothing and fashion trends, current events that seem to be important, slang, ways of speaking, types of humor, anything like that will make references to things, and sometimes they seem outdated pretty quickly. Pop culture then can become a time capsule of this. It can reveal aspects of society's zeitgeist that mainstream academic study can sometimes miss. There's this whole saying in history classes, for example, that history is written by the victors. By looking at history through a pop culture lens, as another example, you're seeing what everyone is participating in or enjoying, not just the quote unquote victors. So you're getting an idea of a better, fuller idea of that time period. It can also start to address taboo topics. Um, we can start seeing how our ideas or beliefs start to shift a bit, for example, based on what's coming up and what's showing up in pop culture. How language shifts is really interesting to learn, things like that. So some specific clear examples of things that we can write about this semester is music, whether that's performance or what we're listening to, the musicians we're listening to, the television shows we're watching, the movies we're watching, popular performance. So a musical that has mainstream appeal as opposed to something that's considered highbrow would fall into this. Popular art, crafting, or hobbies. This we saw a really interesting shift in 2020, for example, how people went from how the crafts of or hobbies of making bread from scratch or crocheting or knitting, for example, went from being considered like an older person's hobby, I guess, to what younger people were doing because we're stuck at home during the pandemic and we wanted something to do. um, Playing games, whether those are phone apps, computer gaming, consoles like PlayStation, board games, card games, tabletop games like Dungeons and Dragons, anything like that. Social media, where we're spending our time online, also how we use technology. Are we building computers to play games, things like that. This is also where YouTube would fall, although YouTube is a really interesting connection where it's in between television and social media. There just isn't a clear category that sums it up yet. Sports, whether that's playing or watching as a fan. Popular literature, the types of things we enjoy watching. This includes comic books, even though comics have their own category here. They also fall into popular literature. Graphic novels, manga, um, series that people tend to just talk about and they become part of our cultural discussion, like the Hunger Games, for example. Slang, ways we're using language, the phrases that tend to show up generation to generation, how they shift, things like that. And then fashion, style, and appearance, how we express ourselves. What kind of clothes are quote unquote in style? How do we like to communicate who we are? This could also consider hairstyle, makeup, tattoos, piercings, anything like that. The history basically, the academic study of popular culture comes from this debate between high and low culture. It's a historical argument where high culture is considered the literary canon, what we consider to be serious art, classical music, um, going to the opera, books that have been around for a while, things like that. Classic art like Greek statues as opposed to like graffiti. And low culture is considered to be the culture of the people, more current and by and for common people. This is also what pop culture is. As an interesting side note, um, this debate ignores that much of what we consider high culture was not considered to be high culture in its time. When the novel was first created, for example, it was considered to be trashy and a waste of time. Why are we wasting our time reading about something that's not true? Serious reading should be educational, for example. Now, when we think about high culture, often we think about the literary canon. Shakespeare, in his time, his plays were performed for free. They were not for the elite. And in the connotation or the language of the time, they're full of inappropriate jokes. We just don't know that because that's not how it tends to be taught, and language has shifted. So, a brief timeline, the study of that low culture led to the academic study in popular culture. We start seeing the early indications in the early 20th century out of fields of literature, anthropology, linguistics, political science, sociology, and economics. In the 1920s and 30s, an academic studies discipline starts to emerge out of that. However, this is also at the time the Great Depression happened, so it didn't really pick up much traction. In the 1950s and 60s, it starts to really get it enter the beginning of its heyday in the UK with the British cultural studies discipline, where the study of literature and literary study moved from the accepted canon, or what we consider to be those writers that we absolutely should read, things like that, that tend to be privileged over books of everyday people. But that shift moved to everyday literature, commerce, how we're spending our money, technology, um, things like that. And the focus was on the processes of culture and how our interests can fuel social change. In the 1970s, popular culture studies really starts picking up in the United States. In 1971, Ray Brown founds the Popular Culture Association of the Americas. He found this due to the limitations around the American studies discipline, where he said it was too canon focused and not enough focused on what everyday people are doing. Also leads to offshoots in different regions of the country. And then in 1973, he forms the Center for Popular Studies at Bowling Green State College in Ohio. This is the first academic school or discipline focused just on studying pop culture, and it's still in existence now. When asked why he's starting this college and focusing on popular culture studies, Ray Brown says that popular culture democratizes society. It is the everyday world around us. The mass media, entertainments, diversions, heroes, icons, rituals, everyday actions, psychology, and religion are total life experience. In other words, he wants to study the things that can be equalizers. He wants to study the things we're interested in, things like that. But we're not a history class or a sociology class. Why are we talking about pop culture and writing? Well, first of all, it's the second most common subject for publication after news. Um, Conveniently, if you can write about something that has a connection to pop culture, you automatically have a built-in audience. So it gets published a lot. So we might as well write what's being written about, right? Also, it uses and develops the exact same skills as writing about quote unquote serious academic subjects. Um, the critical skills, analyzing and breaking down, um, what's going on in a movie trailer. There are entire YouTube channels geared around what's going to happen in this movie based on context clues found in a trailer. It's critical thinking. Predicting what comes next in a series looks at patterns and recognizes those patterns. Same thing that's very integral in when it comes to looking at research. Um, if we're breaking down the lyrics of a song and interpreting what those lyrics mean, it's the same skills as interpreting a poem. If we have, if we're trying to decide between which source to use in a paper, for example, it's the exact same skills as if I'm going to the movie theater and I have enough money to watch one movie, but there are two out that I want to see. The same way we weigh the pros and cons between them. But often when we think about it, these skills, first of all, they apply to any field that requires critical thinking, reading, writing, and creative problem solving, which is any field out there. However, sometimes we separate our academic interests from what's going on in the class and what's going on in the classroom from what we're interested in outside of the classroom, which does us a disservice. We already know these skills. We know this critical thinking. It develops academic study. Um, the same academic habits necessary for any academic study and professional development all come from how we already approach our entertainment. Close reading, recognizing patterns, using logic, questioning our assumptions, understanding analogies, establishing connections. It's very important. Also, if we're writing about what we're interested in, what we're passionate about, our writing is automatically more enjoyable. The passion comes through, that shines through in our writing voice. It's an instinctive thing that you can't really develop. You can tell if a writer is writing about something they care about or something they don't care about based on how their language works. And sometimes we just recognize it on an instinctive level when we're reading it. It makes my job easier, first of all, because I'm grading stuff that I know you're interested in, but also it makes your job as writing the papers more enjoyable because you're right, you get to pick what you're writing about. You're writing about stuff you're interested in. You're developing the same skills as if I gave you a prompt on some type of writing, but you're approaching it from a way that is more meaningful and significant to you. And last, Ray Brown says that we should talk and write about pop culture to avoid zombie takeover. In this context, he's not talking about the zombie here from Plants vs. Zombies or one of the zombies in The Walking Dead or The Last of Us taking over society. Instead, what he's saying is that our entertainment is only mindless if we approach it mindlessly. In other words, let's really consider what we're using, what we're finding interesting, what we're finding important, and by taking that into consideration, we are going to learn a lot more about the same topics. So that's it for today. Or at least for this lecture, there will be a couple other lessons that show up in your folder this week, although this is probably the only lecture video, or there may be one other. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll see you soon.